Like many people out there, I have been obsessed with theory crafting, tearing apart, and just thinking about the message behind The Boy and the Heron after its US premiere this past weekend. It's a beautiful film, it's a meaningful film, and it's a very deep film. Miyazaki has always had an undeniable talent for world building, character building, and storytelling, and all of those are very much on display in The Boy and the Heron. However, I think The Boy and the Heron stands apart from Miyazaki's previous work in a lot of ways, especially because of the fact that this is his last movie. I mean, he's 82. I know he said his previous one would be his last, but he's very old now. There's very little chance that he will be able to embark on another 8-year project like this one. And regardless of whether he actually does make another film, and God, I hope he does, The Boy and the Heron was written, produced, and created as his epilogue, his final letter to his audience that he has cultivated, entertained, and watched grow up over the past several decades. And I think understanding Miyazaki's story is key to understanding the meaning, the theory, and the entire creation that is The Boy and the Heron. As you'll see, there are a lot of autobiographical elements to The Boy and the Heron that are undeniable and therefore essential for understanding this movie. To start off, let's look at the similarities between our main character, Mahito, and Miyazaki in his young life. Just like Mahito, Miyazaki was born right before World War II in Tokyo, Japan. After his city was bombed, his family made the difficult decision to move from the city to the countryside. Miyazaki's father was also the director of Miyazaki's Planes, a manufacturer that built planes for World War II pilots. Around this time, Miyazaki's mother also fell ill to a rare form of tuberculosis in the spine. I'll note briefly here that Miyazaki has cited his mother as a key inspiration to a lot of his female characters. Miyazaki himself also felt like an outcast from school, much like Mahito. He's cited a rare disease he had around this time as a contributing factor to this. I don't think it would be very much of a stretch to say that Miyazaki's illness and outcast status as a child directly influences Mahito's decision to commit self-harm early on in the movie. We'll come back to this in a bit, but I do want to note that a lot of people, including myself, were very off-put by that scene of self-harm, and I think it's necessary for this film to have some gruesome depictions like that, just to separate it from some of his early work. It's Miyazaki telling you, hey, this is not for kids, this is for adults who used to be kids, who have enjoyed my work previously. It's sort of a signal that what is to come should not be taken lightly. And certainly after that scene, I was definitely a lot more on edge being in this World War II countryside environment, not knowing what's gonna happen. Miyazaki creates this uncomfortable, but at the same time depressing, mundane, and very unpredictable world that we, the audience, inhabit with Mahito, and that he inhabited in his youth. The film is reflecting on the darker parts of childhood and specifically Miyazaki's experience as a child. And while many filmgoers probably didn't realize all of these similarities with Mahito and Miyazaki, many people probably did pick up on the similarities of Miyazaki to the great-granduncle character who goes nameless other than great-granduncle. While Mahito's similarities to Miyazaki are very literal, with the setting, the time period, the mother figures dying, the illnesses, the similarities to the great-granduncle character are much more contextual. For instance, the great-granduncle is the creator of this fantastical world that exists outside of time and space, but also somehow is the progenitor of time and space and people and human beings. The great-granduncle character feels a weight of responsibility for maintaining these worlds, maintaining order in the chaotic environment that he has brought upon himself. And Miyazaki feels a similar weight. Studio Ghibli is now a theme park, a multi-million-dollar corporation, and not only that, but he has critical, universal audience acclaim, and as he ages, he is very aware of his legacy. there's a moment when the great-granduncle is talking to Mahito, telling him that it is his responsibility to inherit the world, build it up with no malice. I read this in the film as Miyazaki sort of talking to his son, Gaio, who was the director of the critically bashed movie Earwig and the Witch, and also an executive producer on the film. He helped get Studio Ghibli's park up and running, and he's been a big voice recently in the studio. After doing some research, I found out that longtime collaborator Toshio Suzuki has gone on record and said that Miyazaki's motivation for the film was really to leave his grandson a letter to inspire him and let him know that Grandpa is passing on to the next world, but leaving this film behind as sort of a message for him to inherit. Just as Mahito has to accept that his mother is gone and that it's his responsibility to sort of keep living his life for his mother, to carry her forward, I think Miyazaki is telling us to carry his spirit, carry the creative power that he has given us forward into our own lives. So there's something really interesting going on in this film where Miyazaki is represented and manifested in two characters. We have Mahito, the main character, and the great-granduncle. There's a sort of duality between those two characters, and I don't think it would be too far of a stretch, given the chaotic and spiritual nature of this film, to say that those characters are actually one and the same. This might sound like a crazy theory at first, but when you start to look at some of the evidence, circumstantial, contextual, and narrative, it starts to sort of feel like the only option. Mahito, much like his great-grandfather, has gone mad and reads books all the time. In fact, before traveling to the spirit world, he leaves a book open, half-finished, just like the legend of his great-granduncle. There are physical similarities in the hairstyle, and yes, these can be explained as relational similarities because they're related. I think it wouldn't be crazy to make the assumption that they could be one and the same. The majority of characters in this film have dual manifestations. Kiri is an old maid in the real world, but in the spirit realm, she is totally naive of reality and exists as the gatekeeper for the Wada Wada. Himi, of course, is a young girl in the spirit realm and also goes on to be Mahito's mother. The gray heron is simultaneously an elegant bird and a balding short man with a huge nose. A wild juxtaposition. The parakeets are these fascist, brutal, militaristic people, and then when they come out into reality are just harmless songbirds. The housemaids exist as dolls in the spirit realm, but also real housemaids in reality. Natsuko is this caring, sweet, motherly figure trying to connect to Mahito in the real world, but then when she mysteriously vanishes into the spirit realms, becomes this vengeful, spiteful being. Perhaps the most interesting duality in the film, even more interesting, I think, than Mahito and his great-granduncle, is the duality between the two stones that we see. Of course, there's the one great, big, grand spiritual stone that is the source of power, this alien comet that came from nowhere, that has a will of its own, seemingly. The stone allows the great-granduncle to create this spirit world of his own. The entire ocean is all a creation of the great-granduncle. And while undoubtedly early on in his life the great-granduncle was very grateful and happy to have all of this power at his fingertips, he nonetheless has become resentful of it. His creation has started to consume itself. We see malice, evil, and chaotic dark scenes playing out right in front of him. We see this the most with the dying pelican's soliloquy. But there is another stone that obviously plays a huge symbolic role in the film, and that is of course the stone that Mahito uses to give himself his head injury. There is some aesthetic similarity between the two stones, no doubt, but what I think is more important is the symbolic similarities that the two share. Just like his great-granduncle, Mahito uses the stone to exert power over his environment. He He is fed up with school. He is fed up with living in this strange, chaotic world that is out of his control. And because of that, he injures himself. It's really the only agency he has over his situation, and he chooses to express it. By injuring himself, he no longer has to go to school. His father decides to pull him out completely, and Mahito has successfully changed his environment. And while his great-granduncle derives total absolute control over his world from the stone, Mahito similarly derives control and power from a stone, albeit a lot less, but power nonetheless. The duality between the two characters and the two stones serve as a reflection for Miyazaki, telling his younger self, telling his younger audience that even if you had the power, the will, the resources that I have, the true key to creativity is doing what you can with what you have. He's using himself, his body of work, this film as a call to action for younger generations to go forward without malice and make something great, something better than previous generations could do, while also simultaneously acknowledging that there's chaos, fate, and nature involved, and a world without malice may not be possible. Miyazaki acknowledges chaos, this mysterious force of nature, in multiple ways throughout the film. For one, the tone, the narrative, they're all very disjointed. Mahito will be in one place in one scene and then wake up in a totally different situation in the next. Entire characters, especially the blue heron with the 7th flight feather and his creation of Mahito's mother, and even his seemingly random ill will towards Mahito, are completely unexplained. Miyazaki is doing a lot with these elements, but I think first and foremost he's trying to confuse the audience, trying to give them this impression, this tone of chaotic nature. This idea that things happen out of our control and we just sort of have to be okay with that. And that's the core message of this film. That is the lesson that Mahito eventually learns. In the end, Mahito rejects this world of complete free will, this option to be the god of some unknown spiritual realm, in favor of going back to the people who choose to love him. The shift in Mahito's character really occurs when he confronts Natsuko and chooses her as his mother. It's a bizarre, very strange, very Freudian development of his character, but one that he is forced to make so that he can live in a reality that he's comfortable with. And in the end, he makes the right choice, right? So his great-granduncle's own creation destroys itself. The parrot king, who his great-granduncle has manifested, is the one to take down the structure of his own world and have it implode on itself. And I think the ending can be viewed in a way where it's sort of like man's own control over nature is always temporary and we must embrace the chaos that comes with that. But I also think there's some sort of layer to it where stuff is just wild and you have to embrace the uncertainty of life because that's what makes it beautiful. All that being said, I think this was definitely my favorite movie of the year. If you like this movie, I would also encourage you to go and watch Spirited Away. Of course, you've probably seen that already if you've seen this movie. But Mulholland Drive by David Lynch is another beautifully eerie, very dreamy movie where there's dual identities happening. Another dreamy dual identity movie is Blade Runner. I know those aren't very Studio Ghibli-like, but I do think thematically they are very similar to this movie. It goes without saying that all of this is my own interpretation, a very open-ended and mysterious film, so I would love to hear what you all have to say in the comments. There's also a lot that I couldn't get through in this short video, a lot of stuff we only scratched the surface on, so please add your own interpretations and your own hot takes in the comments. Thank you.